This is a knife. What kind of knife is it? I can't hear you guys. You're too quiet. It's a pocket knife. It's a camping knife. It's an outdoors knife, perhaps. For what purpose was this knife made? Many things. Name a few. Maybe cutting wood, like whittling. Maybe whittling. Maybe just general utilities. You can tell it's made to cut things, right? That's a really basic purpose that it's made for. You can tell that it is made for a particular purpose by looking at its construction carefully, right? And you can tell just by looking at it what kind of knife it is. Here's another knife, right? This knife's a lot different. What purpose was this knife made for? Chopping, probably mostly vegetables. You could also chop meat with it, but yeah, food. This is a kitchen knife. Also gave you lots of clues here, so if you've never been in a kitchen before, you would have known based on the vegetables. Excellent. Okay, so purpose. So these things are designed with a particular purpose, and by looking at the way that it's constructed, you can tell what that purpose is. You might need a little bit of context. You might need to have seen a knife cut before. If you had never seen a knife before in your life, you might not know what the purpose of a knife is just by looking at its construction. But you can also tell the subtle differences between them. Here's something, another picture of some knives. These knives are, it's not important what kind of knives they are, but what are these knives doing right now? Well, they're sitting in a museum inside a glass case or a plexiglass case. This one probably isn't all that high tech, but you could imagine that some knives are probably the atmosphere inside the case is calibrated just so that the knives don't deteriorate if they are very valuable and very ancient. Are these knives fulfilling their purpose at this particular moment? No, they're not. Are these knives in absolutely the best condition they could be in? Yeah, they are. They are preserved in pristine condition, but they are not fulfilling their purpose. Okay, here's another interesting, what are we looking at here? Some pens. Yep, these are two pens. These are two very famous pens, actually. These are the pens that ended World War II on the Eastern Front, the European front. These are the Harry Truman's pens. And they are now in a museum. What is the purpose of a pen? To write some things down. Yeah. Did these pens fulfill their purpose? Yeah, like maybe more than most pens in all of history, right? Amazingly powerful purpose that these pens were used for to end the largest war in history. And now they're in a glass case being preserved. Currently not fulfilling their purpose, but they did. They did at one point fulfill their purpose. Here's another pen that is fulfilling its purpose. I carry a pen in my back pocket all the time. Anybody else carry a pen around? In some ways, a pen that's in your back pocket and used for everyday things is fulfilling its purpose even more, maybe even more, in a certain sense than the pens of Harry Truman. They fulfilled a great purpose at one particular moment, but these pens, the pen that I keep in my back pocket gets used every single day, multiple times a day. It is fulfilling its purpose, and how famous is this pen in my back pocket? It's not famous at all in any way. Just like this pen is not famous here, but it is fulfilling its purpose. It's doing what it was created to do, making the world a better place in a particular way. You can also tell what its purpose is by looking at how it's constructed. Here's something else as we kind of go up the scale here of things that have purpose. They get more and more complicated, right? So this watch has all kinds of moving parts to it. If you are one of those watch guys, you could probably tell me what kind of watch this is. Anybody? No? It's a chronograph watch. It looks really nice too. I guess maybe the purpose, what is the purpose of a watch anyway? It might be up for debate. Is it to tell the time or is it to look really cool? It could be one or the other. I guess maybe both. But it has more moving parts to it, but you can tell by looking at those parts, and especially if you know the context, you can tell what the purpose of that watch is. As we move up into things that are alive, purpose becomes more complex. In fact, there are more purposes in a sense. So if I were to say, this bald eagle soaring in the sky, what is its purpose? How would you respond? What if you were to look at its parts, how it's designed? What would you say its purpose is? Its purpose is to fly, right? Its purpose is to soar. That is certainly one of its purposes. Okay? One of the purposes of this bald eagle is absolutely, it was designed to soar in the sky. It was also, like all other living creatures, it shares certain purposes, like procreation, right? It wants to be alive, it wants to eat, continue to exist, and then create more bald eagles, right? That's part of its purpose as a physical living being. Dog. A dog is closer to human beings than most other animals, right? What would you say a dog's purpose is? How many of you are dog owners? I know the answer to that, really, for almost everyone in the room. But raise your hands if you're one of the good people, the dog owners, okay? What is the purpose of a dog? What was it designed to do? Yeah, I mean, you can just tell that by looking at this dog's face. The answer that we had here was it was designed to be a companion, be company for human beings. Now, that's not its only purpose. You could say there's a number of purposes. But certainly, a dog's purpose is related to some other being, its owner, its master. Its purpose is related to a human being who it bonds very closely with, even though they're not the same species at all. My dog wants to be around humans, especially those who are in our family, much more than she wants to be around other dogs. Way more. She could care less about the dogs. It's the people that she's bonded to that really are, for her, the deepest sense of purpose, as well as chasing a stick. That's her other main purpose in life. Okay? What about these? What about these crazy creations, human beings? What is our purpose? What were we created for? Now, purpose in human beings is much more complex and multifaceted. There are many more purposes for a human being than for a pocket knife. But we can still identify things about the purpose of a human being. And that's a lot of what we're going to be looking at today in Matthew. Well, a lot of what we've seen in Matthew already in chapters 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount. And then as we moved into chapter 8 and 9, and then today in chapter 10, where Jesus is going to send out the 12 into the world, into Israel to preach the good news and to heal diseases. We see a lot about the purpose of a human being. The ultimate purpose of a human being. We're going to come back to that illustration. We're in the book of Matthew right now. Of course, this is one of the four Gospels. It is actually titled According to Matthew. It is how Matthew remembers the events of Jesus' life, the things that he stood out in his mind as very important. We've gone through a number of things in this book. There's just a quick reminder. Jesus is a new and greater Moses in this book. It is the most Jewish of the Gospels. That means he is the one bringing down information from the heavens. And he's greater than Moses. He's not just a prophet. In fact, Jesus is greater than the temple. What that means is he is God on the earth. That's what it means. He is God on the earth. This is our little whiteboard illustration with lots of pieces here. I did not draw this. Somebody else drew this. But whiteboard illustration of the whole book. The book of Matthew has an introduction section, which has got some of that prophecy in it, the genealogy. We'll be looking at that around Christmas time. It's got, at the end, it's got the crucifixion story, Jesus dying and then rising from the dead. And in the middle, it's got 5 sections of teaching, just like the 5 books of the law in the Old Testament. Very interesting. We've gone through one of these already, so we spent some time. The first section of teaching in Matthew is the Sermon on the Mount. And we went through that in some detail. And then last week we started into this second section of teaching where Jesus actually goes and he's living out the Sermon on the Mount. That's what he's doing in this next section. And then he sends his own disciples into the world to live it out as well. So this section we talked about a mission to heal the world. So basically in the Sermon on the Mount, I guess I don't have those pieces up, but in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus explained what human life can look like. What is the purpose of a human being? And you'll remember some of the pieces in there, right? Some of these pieces were huge. The Beatitudes, right? He turns the world upside down. The things that we often think are the purpose of a human being, which for most people, most of the time, is just trying to get as much for myself as I can. We don't always think of it like that, but it's the stuff that's out there. I want to appropriate that stuff for myself, my life, make my life better. Jesus turns that on its head. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who are persecuted. Blessed are those who mourn. He says that he has the golden rule in the Sermon on the Mount. We'll come back to that in a minute. After the Sermon on the Mount, he then goes into, we saw this last week, he goes out on a mission to heal the world. So he teaches his disciples on the mountainside. He says, here's what human life can look like. And then he walks down from the mountainside and he says, let me show you what human life can do if it's rightly ordered. If a human being actually becomes more like God on the inside, all of that stuff in the heart changes. Let me show you what's possible. And what did we see him do last week in that mission to heal the world? It's like everything he touches is restored. He touches the leper. That's the very first thing we saw. Someone that is untouchable. If that person touches you, you get infected. Jesus goes and touches the leper is healed. Jesus walks around healing people, raising the dead, driving out demons, all kinds of amazing miracles, and changing people's lives. We said the greatest miracle that we saw in that section in chapters 8 and 9 last week was actually the healing of Matthew, who wrote this book. And Matthew's healing is not a physical healing. Matthew's healing is spiritual and relational. Matthew is disconnected from everybody else around him. He's an outcast in his society. He's not a good guy. Jesus walks up to him, and all he says to Matthew is, what does he say? Do you guys remember? All he says to Matthew is, follow me. And Matthew's whole life is changed forever. It's not even Jesus' words in that moment. It's what's inside of Jesus changes Matthew, the same way that it changed the leper. He's on a mission to heal the world. What is the purpose of a human being? So we would come back to this. One way that churches have often described this, the overall purpose of a human being, is that human beings are blessed, those who have chosen to accept our purpose and following God, the God who made us, receive his grace. We are blessed in order to be a blessing. Have you heard this phrase before? It's not exactly in the Bible, but it's a great way of encapsulating a lot of biblical teaching. You can find it's based on Genesis chapter 12. God's called Abraham, right? God called Abraham. We went through Genesis earlier in the year. God called Abraham out of his home, out of his whole former life. He blessed him immensely, and then he said, I'm blessing you in this way so that you can go and eventually all the nations on the earth will be blessed through you. And this is one way of encapsulating what the purpose of a human life is. A human life is not meant to be, kind of like that knife we had earlier, the purpose of the knife is not to be on display in the museum. The purpose of the knife is not just to stay pristine and sharp forever. The purpose of the knife is to cut things for a good purpose, hopefully. The knife is not actually directing itself, unlike a human being. The purpose of a human being is not just to enjoy your life. It's not just to, kind of solve some of your problems and be okay and then have as much happiness as we can in life. That is like a knife sitting in a museum case. The purpose of a human being is to be a blessing to the world around us. That's our purpose. Even if in that purpose we are damaged. Even if, as we saw in the book of Philippians, Paul says, even if we are poured out like a drink offering. This is Ephesians chapter 2. We are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to sit around and be happy. Created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. We were created for a purpose, and the purpose is beyond just our own life. We talked about the Sermon on the Mount. This is some of the things that Jesus tells us to do in that sermon. It's just a quick list. There's a lot more, actually. But think about how much each of these items is related to blessing the other people around you, not living for yourself. We're supposed to bless and love our enemies. We're supposed to release control of our lives. We're supposed to forgive other people. We're supposed to give from our heart. We are supposed to be sincere, not trying to trick people or make ourselves look better than we really are. We're supposed to let go of all worry. We're supposed to not judge other people. And then the golden rule, of course, we're supposed to do to others what you would want them to do to you if the situation were reversed. Those kind of people are not living for themselves. They are living, they're not in a museum case. They are living for the world around them, for the other people around them. They are automatically, if you're like this to any significant degree, you are automatically a blessing to everyone around you. Would you like to live your life surrounded by people like this? Absolutely. Absolutely you would. This is where Jesus actually says the golden rule, Matthew 7:12, in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the whole Bible. All of the commands in the Old Testament are summed up in this one phrase, do to others what you would have them do to you. Powerful. Another way we could describe the purpose of a human being, and this comes from Galatians, of course, this is the fruit of the Spirit. What a human being is supposed to produce in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Once again, think about those things. Here's the actual verse. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, or patience, similar words, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. This is Paul saying very much the same thing that Jesus is saying in Matthew 7:12, but just saying it with more and different words. Think again about what this would do, what this kind of a person, if you have become this kind of a person really on the inside to any degree, then are you living for yourself or for the people around you? It's obvious. This is someone who is living for the people around them. This is not a person who is on display in a museum case focused on preserving themselves. This is someone who is living for the benefit of others and of God. So at the end of Matthew chapter 9, which is where we are today, Jesus has done this sermon. He's given this sermon. He has described very clearly what a human life is supposed to look like. And in doing so has shown us what our purpose is. What is it we were made for? And then he's demonstrated what that can do. If you actually become like that, here's what we can do. Here's what is possible. And he's walked around doing astonishing miracles. In fact, the whole northern part of Israel at this moment is just on fire. They don't know what to do with this Jesus. No one has ever seen anyone like him. And there are tons of miracles in this section, but it's not primarily about miracles. Although certainly people who have been changed on the inside, people who are like this, God will do miraculous things through them. He will. It's about restoring, healing the world. Last week we said this was the mission to heal the world. And that the people who have really been changed on the inside, people who are like Jesus, have the power to heal the world. Next, in the end of this chapter, in chapter 9, Jesus tells us what the world needs most. And this is surprising, I think. It is meant to be surprising. It was surprising to the disciples who first heard it. It says this: Jesus went through the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, healing every disease and sickness. They didn't know what to do with this guy. He was like nothing they'd ever seen. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he turned and he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. This is how Jesus ends. Well, I guess there were no chapters when Matthew wrote this, but this is how chapter 9 ends. This is how his tour of Galilee, his miraculous healing tour, this is how it ends. What exactly is Jesus saying to his disciples in this moment? Often in church or in other organizations where we are trying to do good in the world, we often feel like it's just really hard to change people. It's really hard to overcome some of the things that are in this life. You know, here at Community of Hope, we work very hard to spread the message of the gospel. You know, we do it all year long, but one of the big moments where we do it is summer fun at the park, right? Many of us, probably actually almost everyone in this room, most of the people in this room, we're out there in the park doing something this summer, working hard to connect with people, bless people, and then praying for those people as we spread the message of the gospel, the message that God is real, he loves you. Yes, we've all turned away and sinned, but God forgives us through Jesus. You can come back to him. But I think most of us would look at the world and say, it's just that people don't want to come. We're doing all the work, but people don't want to come. People don't want to change their lives. You could think of not just that, but other situations where you're trying to help someone overcome some really big problem in their life. Maybe it's depression, or maybe it's a physical problem, or maybe it's all of these kinds of things that Jesus is walking around just annihilating, just removing left and right in Galilee. You know lots of people with those kinds of problems, people who are stuck, trapped in something for a really long time. Maybe even in some cases, that's you. That's the harvest. Those people being changed, those problems being overcome, that's what Jesus calls the harvest. And most of us look at the world and I confess this today. I often have the feeling the harvest is tiny. We work really hard, but the harvest is tiny. Jesus says I'm wrong. He looks at his disciples, and they had all been trying. Many people, the Pharisees, the Jewish people, had been trying to overcome these problems, and they had felt this same way. It's tiny. We work really hard, but only a few people ever come. Only a few people ever overcome the deep problems in their lives. Jesus is saying the opposite. He says the harvest is actually plentiful. Okay, well then the immediate question is, what in the world is the problem? If the harvest is plentiful, why are we not seeing these things overcome constantly? I mean, we see it sometimes. Now, don't get me wrong. We see a continual stream of people being baptized at our church, people coming to faith in Christ, people's lives being transformed. But it often seems so small compared to the number of people that are out there with all of these difficulties. Doesn't it? The problem, Jesus says, is that the workers are few. What's a worker? What in the world is he talking about? He's the worker. When he talks about workers, he is talking about people like him. He has just described what a human life is supposed to be like in the Sermon on the Mount, and then shown what it can do, what kind of work it can accomplish if it is to any significant degree like that. Now, we're never going to be like Jesus exactly, okay? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about becoming more like him, becoming more like what is described in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, and I admit, I have trouble believing him here. Lord, help my unbelief. He says that if we were more like him on the inside, and we were out there doing the work that he's doing, that the harvest is actually plentiful. The problem is there's not enough workers. Not enough people who are significantly like him. Now, this is so funny. This is classic Jesus, right? So the next thing he tells them, he doesn't tell them go out and work right away. He says, you guys, I want you to go and pray that God will send out more workers, because you can't actually change yourself in these ways. You need to participate. You need to work on yourself. That's been one of the key teachings in the Sermon on the Mount as well. You need to work on your inside, your heart. But it's actually only God who can change your heart. And so he says you need to pray for these things. Pray that God will raise up workers, train them up, train people to be like him on the inside, and that God will then send them out into his harvest field. So he sends them away to pray. And I'm sure the disciples were like, whew, I thought he was about to send us out to do some really hard work. And instead, he just told us to go pray. All right, guys, we're off the hook. So what does Jesus do in the very next, the very next chapter is he sends out the 12. He sends them out right after this. A couple of things you can write down. The world needs more people like Jesus. That's what it needs. That's what he's saying. What do we mean by that? The world needs more workers in the kingdom of heaven. And we're going to see that outlined very clearly in chapter 10. What does that look like to be a worker in the kingdom of heaven? We've seen Jesus do it, and now we're going to see his disciples do it as well. Because the very next thing he does is he sends out the 12. He tells them, go pray that God will send someone out into the harvest field. They go and pray, and then Jesus sends them. So you're really not off the hook. Jesus is trying to raise you. He's trying to raise me up to be more and more like him on the inside so that we can go and be part of the healing of the world. That's the point. And that's actually our purpose. That's the reason that we were created. We were created to bless the world around us, to help other people. So here's what happens next. Jesus calls his 12 disciples. He says, okay, you've prayed enough. Now come on back. And he gives them authority to drive out demons, impure spirits, and to heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew. James, son of Zebedee, his brother John. Philip and Bartholomew. Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector. He always puts himself down in his own gospel. That's a derogatory term that he puts after his own name. Matthew's the one writing this. James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. I'll show you what he sends them out to do in just a minute, but let's say a couple of things about this. We don't need to get all hung up on, can I heal every disease and impurity, and can I drive out every demon I encounter? We talked about this last week. Jesus does astonishing miracles in this moment that are never again matched in the history of the world. But also, it's very clear that he still gives to his church today the power to heal the world. So most of us, I think, have seen God respond to prayers, God respond to laying on of hands. We've seen healings or answers to prayer that were really, really clear. So God is still at work in the world today through his people in powerful ways, but not in exactly the same ways as he was at this time in every situation. So can we expect God to heal people when we pray for them? Yes, obviously. Obviously we can. If the gospel, if Jesus is true at all, then we can expect that God will heal people when we pray for them. Can we expect it to happen every single time exactly the way we want? Obviously not. Obviously not. There are things Jesus actually does in the chapter before this that nobody else will ever do, like rebuking a storm on the Sea of Galilee. When's the last time? I wish I could have rebuked that rainstorm yesterday. I really did not like that rainstorm. That would have been amazing. And then I would be really arrogant after that, and probably wouldn't be good for me. Okay, so he sends them out. He gives them this power, and you have been given power. If you are a follower of Jesus, if you have put your faith in him, you've said, I want you to run my life, I want to live for you, please forgive me, I believe in you, Lord, then you have been given power and authority by God. Not to do anything you want at any moment, but yes, power to heal the world, especially those situations and people that God brings into your life. He sends them out 2 by 2. This is not something they're going to do alone. It's also not something that we talked a bit about this morning. We don't really know how he paired them up. The first couple are pairs of brothers. We don't really know also if these brothers got along with each other. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. you don't necessarily get to pick who your partners are in this mission. But he sends them out 2 by 2. And then we see that he sends them, in this case, with absolutely nothing. These 12, Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Don't go among all the other nations or enter any of the towns of the Samaritans. Go to the lost sheep of Israel. So he sends them to a particular place, actually people that are close to them. Okay, there is an analogy here. Okay, the gospel is now sent to the whole world, but you are mostly called to help your neighbors. And I don't mean just the people who live next door to you, maybe those people, but the people who God has placed in your life. Each of you could think about it right now, and if you spent the time, and especially if you had someone to help you perhaps, you could identify people who God has placed in your life to help. Are you doing it? Are you trying to help them? Are you praying for them? You can't control whether or not they are helped. You're not the one in control, but are you attempting to do the work? Go to the lost sheep of Israel. And then he tells them this, proclaim this message. He doesn't really tell them to teach very much at this point. He just says, tell them that the kingdom of heaven is near. God is right here with you. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Use what God has given you to bless these people around you, to help them. Don't get any gold or silver or copper to take with you in your belts. So they're not allowed to take any money. This is the money at the time. No bag for the journey, no extra shirt, no sandals, no staff. The worker is worth his keep. Whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person and stay at their house until you leave. As you enter a home, give it your greeting. Interesting command. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone is not willing to listen to you or your words, leave that home or town, shake the dust off your feet. Truly, I tell you, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. All right, there's a lot here, but what you can see in this section is what it looks like to be a worker in what Jesus calls the kingdom of heaven. And it is very different than trying to accomplish these things by human power, by human abilities. The disciples are supposed to accomplish whatever they accomplish. It's supposed to be obvious that it's not them who are really accomplishing it. It's actually God and God's power that's doing the work. And so in this case, Jesus sends them out with nothing so that they will be, number one, totally reliant on God. And I want you to think about for a minute what this must have looked like, because it was not super impressive. We might have this idea, if you've heard this story before, you might have this idea that, they showed up in a town and everybody was just super excited to see them. There's crowds of thousands maybe. They're healing people left and right. I do think sometimes they gathered a crowd, but I think that a lot of this was very, very ordinary. They go to this town. They don't have anything with them. They don't even have a bag. You just got 2 young men walking into a town. Nobody there knows them. That's a very everyday kind of experience. Okay, and I'm sure these disciples were looking around the town thinking, what do we do now? They were supposed to, and what were they supposed to do? They had nothing. They couldn't go get a room somewhere. They couldn't even buy food in the town. So they had to go around in the town, so the worker is worth his keep. So what Jesus is saying here is you are going to have a salary on this mission. But the salary is going to come through the kingdom of heaven. It's going to come in God's way, not in a way that you expect, actually. This must have been just a formative experience for these guys. Because what they're supposed to do is actually look around town and just kind of see if there's a person that they connect with, that God connects them with. This is much like I already described. In your life, you should be looking around because God is putting people into your life that he intends for you to help. There's no big plan here. They don't go to the middle of town and put up a tent and then advertise all over town. That's not even a wrong thing to do, but that's not what they do. They don't pass out a whole bunch of flyers. There's no billboards. They're not giving away free donuts. That's not a wrong thing to do. Churches do that all the time, right? Give away some free donuts and maybe talk to people about Jesus. But that's not what they do. They don't have anything. In fact, it seems like what they're doing maybe is asking people for help. Hey, could you imagine yourself doing this? Hey, you don't know me, but you just said hi to me. You're the only person in town who said hi to me. What if I stay at your house tonight? How about that? What would Canadians say to that? Stranger danger, right? Do you know the Bible commands us to entertain strangers? Oh, crazy thing. Find some worthy person and stay at their house. Do you think they always found someone? No. That's why some of the time they wipe the dust off of their feet. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, there are towns they went to where no one came. They started teaching about Jesus in the middle of the town. They were going to have this great, amazing revival. They were going to heal people. They were going to drive out demons. They were going to convert a whole bunch of people, and no people came. They had church, and no one showed up. Sometimes. Not all the time. Sometimes. This is Jesus' plan. This is his plan to take over the world. Wipe the dust off your feet when you leave that town. All right, I'm getting too excited. We need to move on from this. It's a description of what it looks like to be a worker in the kingdom of heaven. And I guess what I want you to see from that section is they're not workers in the kingdom of this world. They're not. It's okay to have structure. It's okay to have a church and a church building. Those things can be good. It's okay to have some plans. I'm planning to have Bible study on Wednesday night. But the core of what Jesus builds into them is not those kinds of things. The core is they're trying to follow the Holy Spirit and just kind of wander around through life and see where God directs them. That's the core. Because they are primarily workers not in a human kingdom, but in the kingdom of heaven, God's kingdom. And they're going to let God lead all of this stuff. So how do you become a worker? What we've seen in this section is, you become a believer first. That's important. You give your life to Jesus. You ask him to forgive you, and you ask him to lead your life. But at that point, how do you actually become a worker? It's really not that complicated. You just pray, and then you start. That's all they do. They pray, and then they start. And they trust that God is going to guide them and continue to train them. These disciples do not have the same response that Jesus had in all of these towns. Sometimes they have an amazing response. There are times when there were huge crowds, or at least large crowds, and when they drove out demons, and they were very excited about that, people were healed. But there are other times when they fail completely. So they are not at the level of Jesus when they start this. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. And this is much like you and me. The final thing that we're going to look at today is Jesus ends, or the next piece at least in this section. I guess he's not ending the section yet. We'll look at that maybe next week. But the final piece that he gets across to his disciples is that this kingdom of heaven that they are going to be working in is a kingdom at war. And so even though they're not doing anything that looks that scary, it might cost them their lives. In fact, it will cost them their lives. Not everyone who enters as a worker is going to be physically killed, but it will cost everyone who is a worker, it will cost them their life. He says a few things, actually he says a lot of things in here. We're not going to read them all. I would encourage you to read Matthew 10 this week. But he says, guys, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. what happens to sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Be on your guard. You're going to be handed over to local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. On my account, you'll be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the nations, the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, God's going to be with you. When they arrest you, you don't have to worry about how you respond to them. God will show you. He will give you what needs to be said at that time. The Spirit of your Father will speak through you in all those situations. It's going to be rough, he says. Brother is going to betray brother to death. Fathers are going to betray their own children. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you're persecuted, flee to another town. There's a lot here. I'm going to skip through some of it for sake of time today. This verse is important. The student is not above the teacher. Who's the teacher? Jesus. Who's the student? Me. What does he mean? That he suffered a lot in this life. Being a worker in the kingdom of heaven cost Jesus what? Cost him his life. A servant is not above their master. It's enough for them to be like their teachers and servants like their masters. So if the teacher is persecuted and mistreated and has a hard time, so are all the other members. So are the students. All right, we got to skip through some of this. Let's go to the very end. Basically, he says, don't be afraid, though, because God is going to be with you. That's what he's saying in all of these sections. So we could sum it all up by saying this. The world is going to attack you. If you are genuinely working, not just if you are a Christian, if you've given your life to Jesus, that is the beginning. So what we call converting to Christianity, giving your life to Jesus, praying that prayer that you would be forgiven and would receive from him, that is the first step. But it's not fulfilling your purpose as a human being yet. It is what's necessary in order that you would be able to fulfill your purpose. But if you start to actually do the work, if you become a worker in the kingdom of heaven, the world will attack you, but God will protect you. But you will be doing what you were made for. Let me just wrap up with this verse here. But also with these couple of ideas. What's the best possible outcome of your life? You're here living your life. Here you are. One day you kind of woke up and realized you were a person, and then you started trying to do the best you could in life. And most of us are just trying to get by in life, right? And most human beings, certainly, we might try to help others, but our main thing is just kind of make sure I'm okay and make sure I have what I need and make sure I enjoy my life. What is the best possible outcome of your life? Do you actually want to? This is a big question, even for Christians. Do you want to fulfill the purpose of your life? Would this be the best possible outcome? This is what most people are living for. Just kind of enjoy as much as possible, be admired by others, and live a good long life. Is this the best possible outcome? Is this what you want the outcome of your life to be? This is like living in a glass case in a museum. This is the knife that is an amazing knife. It's an amazing knife. It's perfect, maybe even. But it's not doing what it was made to do. Or do you want to do what you were made to do? Bless the world around you. Be a true worker in God's kingdom, even if it kills you. Even if it's really hard. Even if you have to lose your life in many different ways to do it. That knife, if it's really being used for its purpose, what happens to it over time? It gets dull. It gets destroyed even. It gets used up. Same with the pen. These pens in my back pocket, these pens are some of the most used pens in the world. I mean, there's lots of pens that are really well used in the world, so I'm not saying my pens are better than everyone else's pens, although I do buy a very good brand, Bic Velocity. I guess that's a product placement there. But these pens are really well used. They are fulfilling their purpose, and I go through a lot of them. Some of you know I have a big box of these pens in my office because I wear them out all the time. Fulfilling the purpose of your life may wreck you. That's what Jesus says as he ends and warns this. Warns us that it might kill us. Do we have that desire that he had to do what we were made for, maybe even especially if it's the thing that's going to destroy me, it's going to kill me? We'll finish with this verse, because in this one statement, Jesus sums up everything that we've just taught here, really, and a way of life, a way of thinking about life that is very different than most people in the world. He says, whoever wants to find their life, whoever wants to truly find their life will have to lose it. Whoever wants to truly fulfill their purpose is going to have to let go of their whole life and maybe even die. Maybe physically, but if not physically, in many other ways. Whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Let's pray, and we'll continue in worship.